On Friday, June 26, 2020, a warm, humid air mass was forecast for the lower Lake Michigan region, courtesy of a warm front lifting through that area. That area was then due to get baked again by daytime heating through broken clouds. The finale was a shortwave trough advancing through that moist, unstable air mass, launching it upwards into the cold upper atmosphere. That's a recipe for severe weather, and after one of the quietest springs I can remember, it had my attention.
So 2020, how would you even describe 2020 so far? Wow, it's been a ride between the health concerns and some of the economic worries, and now we've got civil unrest. Probably not the best year for an active tornado season, and fortunately in that regard it really hasn't been. It's been one of the more quiet springs I can remember. Now, as for me, I've kind of been on lockdown given how the health situation has been in my part of the world, so prime chasing season, April into May, I really couldn't do much. I went around my backyard, I hermetically sealed myself in the EF-150 here, and I went looking for things, but overall the general pattern in the spring has been really weird.
After a few out-of-state busts in early March, followed by a few more out-of-state busts in mid-March, the health situation got pretty rough in my part of the world, and my home state of Michigan enacted a stay-at-home order for all residents, limiting our travel.
Today I'm issuing a stay home, stay safe executive order for all Michiganders, and it goes into effect just after midnight tonight.
Given that I hold a state-issued medical license, I didn't want to run the risk of having it revoked for violating the order, so I had to stick around home for the majority of April and May. Of course, that meant missing a few Plains events, including the April 22nd Tornado Fest in southern Oklahoma. For Pecos Hank fans, that's the day when the deadly Medill tornado crossed the street right in front of him. And despite having a few other severe events come visit me, including a rare instance where the SPC circled my house with a moderate risk, a real oddity this year has been 0 tornadoes in my state so far. I figured if I'm confined to my local area, I could at least attempt to chase tornadoes here, because despite all the hilly areas full of trees, we still get a few twisty tubes every year. But this year we haven't. At least, not yet.
Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not wishing for a tornado to strike my home state or anywhere else for that matter, but I do think it's been pretty weird that we haven't had any yet. Normally by late June we've had at least a few tornadoes come through, but then again this is 2020, so who knows. Now, if today's the day and I do happen to see a tornado, which is going to be tough because mesovortex tornadoes are pretty notoriously hard to see, but if today's the day, I really do hope that it's out over uninhabited land and it doesn't cause any major damage.
So getting back to the severe weather event, I was curious if June 26th was going to be the day. The setup appeared to favor fast-moving linear segments with primarily a wind threat, but if you've watched my video on reading radar, you'll know that little inflow kinks can form in those line segments, which are notorious for spin-up mesovortex tornadoes. The SPC concurred, outlining an enhanced risk area with a swath of 5% tornado probabilities stretching from eastern Iowa into southern lower Michigan. Because I didn't feel like driving around Lake Michigan and through the Chicago Metroplex in the process, I decided to post up on the Michigan side of the lake and wait for the storms to come to me. I staged in Kalamazoo, Michigan, which was far enough inland that should the storms weaken over the cool lake water, they would have time to re-intensify as they moved back over land. As I waited, I kept checking real-time data. Visible satellite imagery showed broken clouds over lower Michigan, allowing for daytime heating of an already unstable air mass. Surface analysis showed a warm front lifting northeast, bringing even more warm, humid air and backed surface winds ahead of the shortwave trough, which would act as a lifting boundary, creating a triple point feature as it moved through. That would be my target. As a sanity check, I also consulted the most recent run of the high-resolution convective models. I probably shouldn't have. The models told me that I was roughly in the right place, but the southern flank of the advancing line would be where the best shot at catching a mesovortex tornado would be. They showed the boundary intersection that I was targeting falling apart into a mess of precipitation, while that southern flank stayed organized. In addition, they were telling me that backed surface winds along the southern border with Indiana and Ohio coupled with a 500 millibar speed max overspreading that same area, would give the directional shear and speed shear needed for rotating storms and the attendant tornado threat. I subsequently wasn't surprised to see a little pocket of high STP following that same path, directly ahead of the advancing storms. So against my gut instinct, I let the models lure me south. My new plan was to follow the US 12 corridor, paralleling the storms to the south and southeast. As I was about 10 miles from the state line, the storms moved onshore from the west, and it became clear that the southern flank wasn't going to do shit. The hotspot was the boundary intersection that I had originally targeted, with a pronounced bookend vortex and comma-head circulation moving along just north of where I had been sitting all day. The severe thunderstorm warnings for this area stated a tornado was possible, though it lacked confirmation. So it was time for a new plan. The storms were moving west to east with very little southern deviation, so the I-94 corridor was where I wanted to be. My best route was just to continue east on US 12, catch I-69 north, and then follow I-94 east, racing the storms and keeping just ahead of them. Problem was, both the leading edge of the storms and I would be arriving at the I-69 to I-94 junction at about the same time. It was going to be really close. Like, really close. I pressed on, following the speed limit, but determined to beat the advancing line of wind, rain, hail, and maybe a tornado. I kept glancing at the radar and at my GPS position, and even with the delay in radar scans, I felt increasingly confident that I'd be able to just squeak by the advancing edge of the storms before they swept over the interchange. I was driving in a light rain that had spread out in advance of the main event, but with about a mile and a half to go before I could exit to I-94 and head east, it hit me.
Rocking the car. Rocking the car.
Driving in the leading edge of a Boeing line segment is dangerous. 70-mile-per-hour wind gusts coming across the freeway, blinding rain, frequent lightning, the risk of hydroplaning, and transient embedded mesovortices that may or may not be spin-up tornadoes is not an environment that you want to be in for very long. Also, chasing at night is dangerous. Sometimes if you're positioned right, you can grab some cool shots, but when you're in the pouring rain, it's really hard to see critical storm structure. It's also really hard to see the lines on the highway, and you're constantly being blinded by oncoming traffic driving with their high beams on to somehow help them see better in the rain. And then you have people like this.
Severe storm, blinding rain. This dude doesn't have his lights on. Are you kidding me right now? Turn your lights on, dude.
Despite the storms only having about a 90-second head start on me from that interchange, I was never able to outrun the leading edge as we both raced east. I eventually gave up near Jackson, Michigan, and let the line overtake me. My consolation prize was heading home while being treated to a phenomenal lightning show on the back stratiform part of the storm complex. By the way, I should have checked the ensemble convective models instead of the ones I chose when I was sitting back in Kalamazoo. The National Severe Storms Laboratory model nailed it. Had I followed its guidance and not made the run south, I would have been able to stay far enough ahead of the line to capture its advance, and would have been in a better position to intercept any areas of rotation that looked suspect. Fortunately, there were no reported injuries from these storms, and while there was some wind damage in the west part of the state, there were surprisingly no tornadoes. The only tornado for the day was reported in Florida. That keeps the June tornado tally in all of 2020 so far at 0 for the Mitten State. It'll be interesting to see what the rest of the year brings, and rest assured I'm still here, ready to film it and bring it to you. So until next time, thanks for watching, and now more than ever, please stay safe.